Valorant's first major international event of the year, Lock-In, just passed, and it was the first time we've seen Lotus in a major tournament. So I thought it would be very insightful to break down exactly what the pros are playing on each map in the pool right now to kind of let you know what you might be wanting to play in ranked. So without further ado, let's start with Ascent. Ascent is a map that's been here since launch, and it has stayed pretty stagnant in how it's played, and the pick rates for agents on the map reflect that. For the duelist of the team, Jett has a 100% pick rate, with every team playing her as the only duelist on the map. This is due to Ascent's fairly simple nature and the power of Jett dashing into a smoke on both A and B site. Mix in a couple long angles that can be opt, and Jett becomes the only duelist pick for the map. For the controller, Omen was the main pick, with Astra occasionally replacing him. This is due to the high potency of dome-style smokes on Ascent, with walls not being as useful and Omen being the current best standard dome smoker. Sentinel-wise, Killjoy was a very popular pick due to her powerful setup on B site, essentially denying access to lane. The only other Sentinel that was picked was Cypher, however that was only one team that played it, otherwise Killjoy was the only Sentinel. The final two slots went as follow. KO was a major pick for the map, shutting down Killjoy on B and making pushes go more smoothly all around, as KO's a pretty standard initiator. Sova was the other major pick, with his recon tools being extra powerful mixed with Ascent's paper-thin walls. However, a non-insignificant number of teams did play with Fade instead of Sova, but Sova still had a significantly higher pick rate overall on the map. So putting it all together, the main team being played by the pros on Ascent is Jett, Omen, Killjoy, KO, and Sova. Next, let's move on to Fracture. Fracture had a much more diverse selection of teams, however a couple things were clear. Breach stands as the primary initiator for the map and has been since launch, with him appearing on 85% of team comps. His abilities are extra powerful on a map with lots of walls and narrow walkways. In addition, Brimstone stood as the primary controller for most teams, with some opting to use Viper either in addition or to replace him. However, he was in 75% of teams on the map. This is due to him having more smokes at once than characters like Omen or Astra, and that really being needed for Fracture pushes. The last obvious pick is Raze, who appeared 75% of the time as well. Fracture is a map where explosive entries are needed, and oftentimes the best teams will push on defense in order to maintain some amount of map control on a map where you're being pushed from two sides. Raze is great at rapidly pushing site, and seems to be replacing the role that Neon once filled on the map. The last two slots are a little less obvious, however most teams running Breach, Brimstone, and Raze also ran KO and Killjoy, with some teams opting to replace that KO pick with Fade, including the champion of the event, Fnatic. Personally, I believe the comp with Fade functions a little better, with Breach being able to provide an immense amount of util of initiation. However, if we're just looking at pick rate, KO does see more play. So the main team being played by the pros on Fracture is Breach, Brimstone, Raze, KO, and Killjoy. Next, let's move on to Haven. The most prominent pick on Haven is Killjoy, with an 85% pick rate. Killjoy is able to consistently get value both on defense with her utility, but also on offense with her ultra-powerful Lockdown ultimate. Another common pick among pro teams was Breach, for similar reasons to Fracture. Breach is able to get large amount of value off of his abilities on a map with lots of narrow hallways. In terms of controllers, Omen was the most common pick, but an even higher rate than Ascent, some teams chose to use Astra over Omen as the controller pick to add some more defensive power to the team. For duelists, Jett was the most common pick with a 77% pick rate. She's able to get the most consistent value and have some of the easiest times pushing on the site, so it makes sense that she's also seeing play on Haven. The final slot is a messy one, with a large number of teams choosing Sova. However, Fade, Skye, and KO also commonly fill this slot. While which one you choose is up to you, Sova was definitely the most common choice throughout the tournament. So the main team being played by pros on Haven is Killjoy, Breach, Omen, Jett, and Sova. Next up, we have Icebox. Icebox is one of the most known meta maps in the game, but it seems like Harbor is starting to make some waves, pun intended. Despite that, Viper does have a 100% pick rate on the map. Her wall provides so much value on both offense and defense that she has become a must pick on the map. That being said, Harbor does have a 29% pick rate, with many teams running both Harbor and Viper to keep up the oppressive walls for even longer, and for other reasons we'll talk about a little bit later. Killjoy also has a huge pick rate on the map, with her appearing in 92% of team comps. Currently, she's just the best Sentinel in the game, and it shows as her pick rate is strong on every map except one, which we'll also get to later. Sova also sees a large amount of play on the map, as there are several long sight lines that allow him to excel past Fade, who is typically limited in longer range environments. For Duelist, Jett was the most picked, but only had a 67% pick rate. While a team with her on it is the most common, there were several teams who opted to not have a Duelist on Icebox. The final slot is the interesting one. Sage is the next most common pick with a 67% pick rate. However, this is way down from her once must-pick status, and a major reason for this is Harbor's Cove ability, allowing for more ways to plant on both A and B site. I expect to see her pick rate fall even further as more and more teams start using Harbor on the map. But even with that, the main team comp being played by pros on Icebox is currently Viper, Killjoy, Sova, Jett, and Sage. Next up, let's talk about the newest map, Lotus, which has the most experimentation out of all of the maps. Despite that, there are two characters that seem to be popping up in most games, and they are these. Killjoy, who is the most picked agent with a 75% pick rate, again for the reason that she is the most powerful Sentinel in the game right now, and the map doesn't seem to have any features that favor other Sentinels. The other agent is Omen, with a 70% pick rate. This is for a similar reason to Ascent and Haven, the fact that Lotus is great for dome-style smokes. In addition, Astra does have a 20% pick rate, meaning that 20% of the time teams are choosing to use Astra over Omen, but again, this kind of comes down to personal preference and how much defensive power teams are looking for. Filling out the rest of the team is a little tricky, as a lot of teams brought a lot of combinations of agents. The next most common agent was Raze, with a 55% pick rate. Making up the remaining 45% for the Duelist slot is a mix of Jett, Neon, and Reyna. It seems that the Duelist to be used is still in the air, but Raze does have a significantly higher pick rate and was used by Fnatic, who ended up winning the whole thing, so I'd expect Imitation will increase Raze's pick rate. For the final two slots, teams really mixed it up, but the two characters that seem the most common are Viper and Fade. Viper is seeing play because of the defensive nature of her wall. While dome smokes do enough to help with pushes, there are some great Viper walls that add a ton of value to the team, so a lot of teams are choosing to run two controllers. Fade is the only initiator with a significant pick rate. Her util is pretty good on the map, as most encounters are closer range than maps like Icebox, but I will note that KO, Sova, Breach, and Skye all have pick rates that are at least 20%, and many teams ran two of the initiators over the double controllers, so what that final team comp is still in the air, but the main team being played by pros right now is Killjoy, Omen, Raze, Viper, and Fade. Next, let's dive into Pearl. Astra is the most picked agent on Pearl, and it's for good reason. Her abilities allow teams to easily take control of mid, and for Pearl, that's a huge aspect of the map. That is why she's picked 75% of the time. In terms of Duelists, Jett sees the most play on the map with a 72% pick rate. It seems that despite the barrage of nerfs she's endured, she's still the most standard duelist in the game, where she can just get more value than other duelists no matter what the situation is, unless a certain map leans heavily towards the strengths of another duelist. Following Jett, Killjoy is also prevalent on the map, surprise surprise, with a 69% pick rate. Everything I've said about her before still applies here. She's the best Sentinel in the game, so she'll see play on most maps. KO also saw a lot of play on the map as the primary initiator for teams. He is similar to Jett and seems to be able to get a lot of value for teams as a whole no matter the situation, and as such, he sees play on Pearl, which is a fairly standard map. The final slot really depends on the team, but it was either Viper or Fade, with Viper being more common. Viper's wall is a very useful tool on the map, especially if Astra is the other controller there. On the other hand, initiators are some of the best characters in the game, and Fade provides a ton of both information and utility to a team. However, despite that, the main team being played by pros on Pearl is Astra, Jett, Killjoy, KO, and Viper. Finally, let's discuss how Split was being played. The most obvious thing looking at all the Split games now that it has returned to competitive play is that Raze is still very dominant on the map. This tournament did take place before her boombot was nerfed to last half as long, but for this tournament she saw a 100% pick rate on the map. I do expect this to fall off after the boombot nerf, as the boombot is a big reason for her dominance on the map. However, another obvious takeaway is that Astra is the most common controller on the map for a couple of key reasons. First, Split is a map that favors dome-style smokes in a lot of situations, but more importantly, it asks for a mix of dome smokes and walls, and that's why I'm going to lump the number 3 slot in here as well, which is Viper. Since Viper is there to have the long-lasting, impactful walls, Astra is favored over someone like Omen for her non-smoke abilities like her Suck and Concuss. Yes, her smokes are still very useful, but the heavy presence of Viper and Raze on the map lead to Astra seeing more play in the dome smoke slot than Omen. Skye is the next agent that most pros are running. Sova has never been great on split, and Breach is kind of in the same boat. Skye acts as a middle ground between the two and sees a pretty high pick rate at 57%. Now, interestingly, Jett is the most common 5th slot, which is abnormal as most maps have 1 or even 0 duelists on the team. Split seems to favor 2 duelists and 2 controllers, leading to many comps with no Sentinel at all. In the past, this would have been filled by a Sage, but it seems like Sage is falling out of favor in Split. So either way, the main team comp being played by the pros is Raze, Astra, Viper, Skye, and Jett. Alrighty, that's it. Those are the team comps that the pros were using at VCT Lock-In. This is a bit of a new style of video for me, so let me know your guys' thoughts on it in the comments down below and if you'd like to see more like it. Either way, that's all for now. I'll see you in the next one.